Okay, will embrace the phenomenological most evident, the human being's finality, finitude, mortality, the inescapable thrownness into time and history, as well as admit to the impossibility of escaping the clutches of time, the progresses and regresses of history, and admits to the impossibility of escaping the finitude into ahistorical, heavenly state of immortality and eternity. Our modern thanatology may sound fine and self-evident to us humans of the 21st century. However, the question really remains, and this lecture will try to address it, as to why is it so difficult today for us to fully realize this post-metaphysically luxurious character of life, that this life and earth is all we have got. And why is it so difficult to change our lives accordingly? How come we cannot simply bring to the fore the fragile beauty of it all in its transient magnificence? So this is the introduction to the lecture, and I'll now start by first of all addressing a little tiny issue called relationship between philosophy and anthropology. It's a huge topic, I guess, too huge for the lecture to tackle in its entirety, but a tiny mention might be important here, right? Especially because Martin Heidegger, who's the phenomenologist of one of my main interests in doing philosophy and phenomenology, especially because Martin Heidegger himself, as you can see here in the part one of his first philosophical book called Being and Time, titles under the heading paragraph 10 is titled How the Analytic of Dasein is to be Distinguished from Anthropology, Psychology, and Biology. Heidegger was namely a philosopher who decided to stubbornly distinguish his philosophical endeavors from those of sciences and social sciences as well. Anthropology, psychology, and biology, you see here mentioned, actually for him are a lesser science. Here you can see that philosophy is to be understood as an existential analysis versus anthropology, psychology, and biology being merely existential analysis. Now the difference is only in a letter or two. Graphically, I won't go into detail here. Suffice it to say that Heidegger would say that all the sciences except for philosophy fail to address the question and issue of the truth of being. A very general remark, fail to address the issue of the meaning of being or meaning of life in general. The reason why I mention this is, now I'll mention another interesting guy dating back from the 16th century, a very interesting guy called Francisco Suarez, and he will help me make my claim, help me explain what my relationship to anthropology as a philosopher would be. Suarez was a Spanish Jesuit philosopher and theologian, a great interpreter of Aristotle. And he, in interpreting Aristotle, he said, I am fed up with all these tiny treatises on Aristotle, dealing only with small chunks and bits of Aristotle in each in their own way. I want to interpret Aristotle as a whole. And in this endeavor, he came up with a very rewarding scheme of how to address Aristotle as a whole. And actually, this scheme can then serve us as a interpretative tools for any philosophical or scientific endeavor in general. What did he do? He actually said that all philosophy or all knowledge, he would call it metaphysical, right, could be schematically differentiated, categorized in the following fashion. First, we have the general metaphysics as general ontology. that would mean, what do we claim about everything in its entirety as to its truth of being? And then we have three specific metaphysics, three special contents that can be differentiated and found in every philosopher and every science. That of cosmologia rationalis, rational cosmology. Here we will find philosophy of nature and physics. Then theologia rationalis, rational theology. That would mean ontology of God or first principle or origin. And psychologia rationalis, rational psychology. Here we could also add anthropology, ethics, politics, and ontology of mind in general. So these three specific metaphysics we could reduce down to the three basic worlds. As we can see here, I ventured that, not Suarez, but we could easily do that. So three basic content paradigms of every research would be world, God, or human. What does Suarez, in what sense does Suarez help me soften down Heidegger's stance towards the social sciences in general? Well, how does he help me soften the harsh judgment of philosophy on anthropology? Because I'm not an advocate of such a stance. It's Suarez's claim that we can say there is, since ages ago, since Aristotle, anthropology in philosophy. So philosophy tackles the truth of human. So there is an anthropology in philosophy, and of course there is philosophy in anthropology. There's a very lovely dialectical twist which can help us alleviate the too harsh statements made by Martin Heidegger. At least I guess so. Another issue worthy of mentioning here, and I guess that the cultural anthropology might have something to do with that, the issue of the possibility of universality of the approach or particularity of the approach. The name cultural anthropology would imply that it is difficult to get the universal outlook on it all, right? But at any rate, Heidegger, to whom we are getting shortly, his analytic of Dasein, that Dasein is his name for the essence of what it means to be human being. His analytic of Dasein was supposed to reveal the basic structure of human existence, a structure so basic that it could serve as a universal anthropology, as a universal truth of what it means to be human. At least that was his ambition and intention in his work Being and Time. So of course, the question remains whether he succeeded or not. Regardless of this, researchers of his work have all agreed that Heidegger's first major work, Being and Time, endeavors to get this universal structure of existence from two geographically, historically, concrete cultures from our past, European past. The culture of ancient Greece, here Heidegger is relying heavily on Aristotle, and the culture of early Christianity. Here he is relying on the epistles of St. Paul's and confessions by Augustine. So, what I guess with his ambition of writing a universal anthropology, Heidegger actually had in mind and wanted to do, or was forced to do, was that he actually wanted to establish a universal anthropology to combat the attempts made by Christian thinkers who wanted their particular anthropology become universal one. So Heidegger's attempt to write a universal truth of what it means to be human was in a way a competition or an attack at the Christian ambition of Christian thinkers who wanted to write down a universal anthropology of their own. The echoes of this battle, there's a wonderful Greek term, gigantomachia, the fight of the giants over who owns the truth, the universal truth. Echoes of this can be detected, actually, and we all know, in current attempts at the level of European Union. They want to proclaim that Christian values set is the only value foundation of European Union in a way, so a universal set of values, the same battle going on. At any rate, enough of this generalities. Let's carry on towards the topic of our today's lecture, dying of death. Heidegger actually writes on mortality in the division 2 of his book, Being and Time. See here, so the first paragraph is titled The Possible Being a Whole of Dasein and Being Toward Death. First, language-wise, a comment is needed. Why does Heidegger love these hyphens and hyphenations so much? Not so sure I know the answer. They're stylistically awful. And Slovenian languages are no exception here. The translations are all equipped with the hyphenations. I'm not very keen on using them, but at any rate, I guess what he wanted to tell us using these hyphens is that our being is always and necessarily being toward death. He does use other phrases, such as being in the world, also with hyphens, and that would also mean that if humans are, then they are necessarily within the world. So these hyphens want to say that for humans, to be means to be inescapably on our way towards death. So Heidegger's division 2 of being and time is actually an ontological interpretation of death. So let's jump into the text. Why not? And see let me just remind you, for those of you who have not tackled his writings, is pretty academic, pretty dry sometimes, but when you enter his house, it all seems better understandable and more logical. So let's just dive into it with the first quotation, where we see how to be human should mean to be mortal. Death is a possibility of being that Dasein, human being, always has to take upon itself. With death, Dasein stands before itself in its ownmost potentiality of being. In this possibility of dying, Dasein is concerned about its being in the world absolutely. Its death is the possibility of no longer being able to be there. When Dasein is immanent to itself as this possibility, it is completely thrown back upon its ownmost potentiality of being. Thus, immanent to itself, all relations to other Dasein are dissolved in it. This non-relational ownmost possibility, death, is at the same time the most extreme one. As a potentiality of being, Dasein is unable to bypass the possibility of death. Death is the possibility of the absolute impossibility of Dasein. That's this most famous sentence, right? Thus, death reveals itself as the ownmost non-relational possibility not to be bypassed. As such, it is an eminent immanence. Its existential possibility is grounded in the fact that Dasein is essentially disclosed to itself in the way of being ahead of itself. This structural factor of care has its most primordial concretion in being toward death. So here we are with this very dense text, right? Full of classical ontological conceptuality, academically potent, one might say, but it's not difficult to read from it what? The harshest possible anthropological diagnosis, right? To be anthropos means to be on our way to death, inescapably, cannot be bypassed. Death, if I repeat, reveals itself as the ownmost non-relational possibility not to be bypassed. And yet, our European culture, since at least ancient Greece and early Christianity onwards, has seen to it that we have kept investing huge amounts of energy, time, life into this hopefulest reverie, daydream, that death can be evaded and escaped. And it is here that Heidegger's diacriticism steps in. So here we find some additional quotations that really go more critically into the stuff. Now he mentions the difficulty that an average human being has with facing this mortality issue. Being toward the end does not first arise through some attitude, which occasionally turns up. Rather, it belongs essentially to the thrownness of Dasein, which reveals itself in attunement in various ways. The factical knowledge, or a lack of knowledge, prevalent in Dasein as to its ownmost being towards the end, is only the expression of the existential possibility of maintaining itself in this being in different ways. Oh, this is difficult, but we're getting to it. The fact that factically many people initially and for the most part do not know about death must not be used to prove that being toward death does not generally belong to Dasein, but only proves that Dasein, fleeing from it, initially and for the most part, covers over its ownmost being toward death. He goes on in his criticism. The publicness, the public truth of everyday being with one another knows death as a constantly occurring event, as we call it, case of death. Someone or another dies, be it a neighbor or a stranger. People unknown to us die daily and hourly. Death is encountered as a familiar event occurring within the world. As such, it remains in the inconspicuousness characteristic of everyday encounters. The inconspicuousness, unobviousness, that also already secured an interpretation for this event. The casual, fleeting, by the way, talk about this, which is either expressed or most likely kept back, says, one also dies at the end. But for now, one is not involved. This evasion of death, which covers over, dominates everydayness so stubbornly that in being with one another, the neighbors often try to convince the dying person that he will escape death and soon return again to the tranquilized everydayness of his world taken care of. This concern has the intention of thus comforting the dying person. It wants to bring him back to Dasein by helping him to veil completely his own most non-relational possibility of death. Thus, the people make sure of a constant tranquilization about death. But basically, this tranquilization is not only for the dying person, but just as much for those who are comforting him. And even in the case of a demise, publicness is still not to be disturbed and made uneasy by the event in the carefreeness it has made sure of. Indeed, the dying of others is seen often as a social inconvenience, if not a downright tactlessness, from which publicness should be spared. So, there's a couple of quotations from Heidegger, all pointing in one direction, that we as human beings today, even though we try to boast ourselves that we are all readily acquainted with the harsh reality of being creatures towards final death, have totally real issues with facing our own final event, of realizing that it belongs necessarily to our essence. That we are actually constantly in the process of tranquilizing the obviousness of it. So my first step forward in here would be that not only is this true in our everyday life, but that we have to point towards the ancient roots of this deepest cultural basins of ancient Greece and Christianity, who have seen to it that we are used to react to the phenomenality of death in this way. That we have to point more generally back into the origins and the beginning of metaphysics. Metaphysics as a huge phenomenon covering the whole, as Suarez before told us, it covers all the possible topics we are to address. And Heidegger would also say metaphysics not only does that, it also implies that we are talking about a historical development of European culture. Metaphysics would, according to Heidegger, start in ancient Greece with Plato and start to come to an end with Friedrich Nietzsche, the end of the 19th century. So we have this huge historical phenomenality called metaphysics, only one name, one concept, but it does says it all. It is a cultural endeavor to be found in many a thinker, writer, artist, scientist, philosopher, theologian, and so on, who attempted to transcend physics to beyond, to a meta in metaphysics. Here in this story, a basic metaphor comes to mind. You see how I use the hyphens as well. Sorry, it's Heidegger's influence, I could say. But it's used just to stress or emphasize the similarity with the two concepts of meta, pherein, and metaphysics. So with the metaphor of the sun, we are supposed to be carried over beyond into a realm different from our world here, right? And both Plato and Jesus have seen to it that death in its fateful tango entanglement with life is something that dies if we follow the path of knowledge of ideas, according to Plato, or that death dies if we follow the path of love and hope in Christ. Ask Plato and ask Jesus. They both say the same thing. They both talk about the dying of death. They both use the metaphor of the sun. You can find it in the Gospels and you can find it in Plato's Republic, depicting the idea of the good. And actually, the Greek word Plato uses for his conception of the highest good of all times and places is topos hyper Uranios. Uranus in Greek is the sky. So what Plato is talking about is about a place that lies beyond the skies. And there is no death. But in order to get there, you have to climb the ladder of knowledge, right? Of acquiring, of grasping the ideas. And this death of death, we could say, is the basic trait of European civilization. It's no small thing. It's been here since ages, and it's still here, only it is slowly dying out or vanishing, this idealism of conquering death. It's been in our hearts and minds since ages, but it is slowly coming to an end. Now, what about us, post-metaphysical humans? What about us, mortals, as we like to call ourselves today? The basic trait of metaphysics, in using the Greek word, or the Latinized version, supernaturalism, would be the afterlife an after world, or better, the world beyond, and Plato and Jesus sets aside the need for any and all saying goodbye to life. I guess this is the basic gist to it. Don't say goodbye, we'll meet again. We all know the stories. And it's the same in Plato. We'll all meet on this heavenly plateau. We'll all meet again and be able to see the ideas themselves shining as the sun. And then we'll go back to life and then come back up there and maybe remember what it was like before and so on. But today, so okay, this is the history of metaphysics. But us, people in 20th and 21st century, who boast ourselves, we have overcome metaphysics, this daydreaming of an afterlife. If I might allow myself this slight bluntness, we could say we stopped believing it. Plato's and Jesus' son has switched off. The star has died. We all know it. And yet, why does Heidegger have to say that, pronounce that criticism, that we don't know and don't want to know that we are dying creatures? I mean, even astrophysicists have shown recently, quite convincingly, that the death of a star actually what implies that it still shines. The shining is still there long after the star has died, right? And here a question could seriously be asked: is the glow really only an afterglow? So likewise, only I guess even more stubbornly, this Platonist and Christian son, although we have stopped believing in it, still shines in our way. Friedrich Nietzsche, another important philosopher at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, Nietzsche would say, 18, 19 and 20, yeah. Nietzsche would say that this is our current state of being stuck in nihilism. Another huge topic we won't be dealing with here, but anyway, if we translate this broad and pretty ultimate issue into our reality of our approach to death, we get to where we began, with the quotations from Heidegger in his Being in Time. That the more we look into how we behave today, the more we realize that we have serious issues with dealing with our mortality, with saying goodbye. We have all heard about it, this loss of the beyond. We all know it. We all feel it. We know the sun is no longer shining up there beyond the skies. And it's been happening to us, at least since Hamlet's soliloquy, famous words when he says in Shakespeare, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, it puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others we know not of. And thus, this is why conscience does make cowards of us all. And the native hue of resolution is sickled over with a pale cast of thought. And our enterprises and endeavors of great pitch and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action and so on. You all remember Hamlet and his pale skin realizing that maybe the sun has set to him as well. Us moderns, now that we have come to disbelieve this possibility of an afterlife, has this situation changed regarding our bidding final farewells? Have we actually come to realize this life and this earth and this sky and this humanity is all we have? And the next generation of people now already growing, now still youngsters, is all we have to be looking forward to? No. I guess that the reason for such a denial, or maybe to a lesser extent, this tranquilization that Heidegger talks about, tranquilization about death, does not lie only in the metaphysical dream dreamt by either Plato or Jesus, Platonists and followers of Christ. We could easily have turned our loving gazes back from the star beyond, turn our gazes back to the starry canopy between the earth and the sky, between Gaia and Uranus. Were it not for yet another huge culprit and villain? What is it that keeps us in a trap? Us modern rehearsers of dress rehearsal. What is it that keeps us entangled in the frustrated knot of resentment over life? What is it that keeps us failing again and again to open up to proper goodbyes? Be it on the street or beside the deathbed. What is it that keeps grabbing our garments of mind and dragging us down, keeping us stuck in the spirit of revenge and spirit of gravity? Geist der Schwere, Nietzsche would say. By the way, interestingly, the spirit of heaviness or gravity, going down, looking down because going down, heavy is our mind, heavily burdened. An interesting and funny side remark. You know, today the astrophysicists all talk about always and only about gravity. What are the power of attraction and force of attraction? Nobody talks or looks in the other direction. The other way of it is levity, being light, of rising up. But just a side remark. So, why are we stuck in resentment? Resentment over the fact that the sun that was promised to rescue us from death is no longer there. Why can't we see and join in the holy matrimony of saying hello and saying goodbye, of birth and death, of this prestigious gift or play of life? We could say that, like in the age of metaphysics, where this life was understood only a short period before entering the true proper life of eternity, that we still tend to understand life and feel it to be but a dress rehearsal before it will finally commence. On how many occasions I can see myself doing it. Oh, when will I start with this important thing? Oh, let me wait. It's no longer there. I'm not ready yet. It's just a rehearsal. It's just a rehearsal. It'll commence later on. So in a way, we could say, stuck in disbelief. This loss of belief is readily recognized in European modern epoch. Now, remember, all you readers of great literatures, the loss of the lost generation, the feeling of loss and lostness, the depression and Weltschmerz of Romanticism, the pain experienced with the world, the nausea over meaninglessness of life of Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialists, the senseless waiting for Godot, Beckett, heavenly Beckett, or our postmodern indifference, ennui, boredom for that matter. They all go to show that we have stopped believing in the power of the sun, that we all know that the sun has set, but we're still stuck in it. So maybe in this sense, sorry, Martin Heidegger, Nietzsche could be understood as a promise of the turning point. Why Friedrich Nietzsche? Well, it was Nietzsche who said that we have to think, if we think of the Greek philosophers, we have to differentiate between Plato and the philosophers before Plato. Those pre-Platonics are more interesting. They have not yet started this divide of physics and metaphysics. And recall Nietzsche's interpretation of Jesus in his Antichrist. Jesus, whom he understands as a genius of heart. But we don't know really what he wanted to tell us, where the kingdom of God lies, namely here in the state of his heart and so on. And his proper insight, or harshest possible diagnosis of our current state, being stuck in nihilism, is also worthy of mentioning here. You know, the two suns, the sun by Plato and the sun by Jesus, they are shining up there above, and they cast shadows on our world. And Nietzsche said, when that sun died, these shadows still remain creeping in our world. And last but not least, Nietzsche's not only diagnosis of our being stuck in the past, but also his prognosis. If you go read his Thus Spoke Zarathustra, there you can find hints at a possible healing of the European man, where he says, maybe we will be able to overcome this nihilism and it will feel as if the heaviest burden has been lifted from all things. So, back to death and life, from being stuck in the death of the death of death. If I come back full circle to the initial question, why is it so difficult today to fully realize the post-metaphysically luxurious character of life? That this life and earth is all we've got? And why is it so difficult to change our lives accordingly? How come we cannot simply bring to the fore the fragile beauty of it all in its transient magnificence? The answer to this weird question is unsettling. It is difficult to come back to death, belonging to birth, because of our remaining stuck in the postmodern death. Away with these grand narratives of the death of ancient Greek and Christian idealism in modern pessimism as the ambitious project of the death of death. Shortly and paradoxically put, being willfully or unwillfully, willy-nilly, stuck in the death of the death of the death won't get us there. So what is this? I guess I should use 4 deaths here. It's not nonsensical. It's not just what's the phenomenality from the financing world? It's not just meaningless repetition. We can see how it's construed. So the first one, or the last one from the phrase above, the first is the death of death. It is the ancient idealist attempt, metaphysical idealism of Plato and Jesus, where he can experience the death of death through either insight, Plato, or love, Jesus. Then, centuries later, we're coming towards our modern period. Here we see this project of the dying, of the killing of death, come to a stop. That people stop believing in this idealism. So we experience the death of the death of death. Modern pessimism, nihilism, or the death of idealism. We are being disappointed with it all. And you go read these literatures or philosophers alike. What you, for example, find in Sartre is a total disappointment over the meaninglessness that was previously accorded to the human being with Plato and Jesus. And then finally, this is not the end. This death of the death of death is superseded by yet another death to be, we should see it today, our present day post-modern, so to call, post-metaphysical literature or whatever, boredom and indifference, that's on the rise. Ask psychologists. They all say boredom is on the rise. Indifference to this huge metaphysical ambitious story is on the rise. Even the indifference to what Sartre or Hemingway with the Lost Generation had to say, that's not important as well. Nothing is no longer important. But this final stage could be only a consequence, still a consequence of being stuck in the disbelief in the rescue, in the Son that is there to rescue us. And yet we need to get there, right? Where do we need to get? Back to death. In its marriage with birth or life. Where do we need to get? There where time and space and life and death and birth and the magical cycle of rebirth takes place. Where, as Tom Waits would put it, time is honey, sweet and slow. To come slowly to the end, to wrap it up, this is where I believe this project of DEAGENCY is looking toward. This is what makes the project so to the point, I would say. We should talk about death because we are being stuck in the death of death. We should get back to the thing itself. It's not an easy job to do, I have to admit it. Because death is, and because of it, life is precious. And to wrap it up, I'd like to all of you to listen to this piece of music, which I believe comes from this mid-space of life and death, at least for me. It's called Isola Misteriosa, Mysterious Island. It's actually from the 1973 movie called Isola Misteriosa e il Capitan Nemo. Music written by the divine Gianni Ferrio, Italian composer, less known colleague of famous Ennio Morricone. Let me try now. So remember, the music comes from where we should all bring and turn our gazes to, and our hearts and souls. The magnificence of the transient is short, but life. It ends abruptly. The song is longer, but life ends abruptly as well. So I would like to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for your attention.